Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're not just talking about history, we're stepping right into it. Imagine, if you will, the scorching Egyptian sun beating down on your face, the air thick with the scent of spices, sweat, and the salty tang of the sea. You're standing at the very edge of the known world, about to step into a city so grand, so vital, that its eventual disappearance would become the stuff of legend. Just a quick heads up, if you were actually there right now, you'd probably pick up a nasty parasite or two, and the plumbing situation would make you deeply, profoundly miss your modern toilet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the ancient dust beneath your sandaled feet, warm and fine, as you approach the grand causeways leading into Thonis-Heracleion. It's a sensory explosion, a vibrant cacophony that washes over you, momentarily disorienting. The air hums with 1,000 different sounds, the rhythmic creak of ropes from colossal ships, the guttural shouts of dockworkers, the high-pitched chatter of merchants, and the distant, sonorous chanting from a temple. The light here is different, too. It's not just bright, it's alive, reflecting off the Nile's wide expanse and the gleaming limestone of monumental structures. You blink, trying to adjust, and a gentle breeze, carrying the scent of exotic incense mixed with dried fish, brushes past your face. Welcome, my friend, to the beating heart of ancient Egypt's maritime power, long before the whispers of its watery doom began. You stand for a moment, just absorbing the sheer scale of it. This isn't just a port, it's a sprawling metropolis, a city built on the very edge of the Nile Delta, where the mighty river finally surrendered its waters to the Mediterranean Sea. From your vantage point, you can see the distinctive, flat-bottomed boats, known as baris, unique to the Nile, jostling for space alongside sleek Greek triremes and sturdy Phoenician merchant vessels. They look a bit like floating bathtubs, if bathtubs were capable of carrying tons of grain and precious metals across vast distances. You chuckle softly to yourself, wondering if they had ancient maritime traffic controllers to sort out this organized chaos. As you step further into the city, the crowds envelop you. People from every corner of the Mediterranean are here, Egyptians in their crisp white linen, Greeks in their more elaborate tunics, Nubians with their distinctive hairstyles, and even a few Persians, their rich fabrics catching the sunlight. It's a dizzying tapestry of languages, a symphony of commerce and culture. You hear snippets of Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, all blending into an incomprehensible, yet strangely beautiful, hum. You try to imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of trying to order a falafel here without a universal translator app. Good luck with that. Your path leads you towards the bustling docks, where the true pulse of Thonis-Heracleion is felt. Here, the air is thick with the smell of salt, tar, and unwashed humanity. Cranes, simple yet ingenious, groan under the weight of massive cargo nets, lifting amphorae filled with olive oil, wine, and honey from the holds of ships. Piles of papyrus scrolls, ready for export, sit next to gleaming ingots of copper and tin. You see a group of laborers, their muscles rippling under the relentless sun, straining to move a colossal block of granite, probably destined for a new temple. It makes your gym workout look like a leisurely stroll. This city, you realize, isn't merely a place where goods are exchanged, it's the official gateway to Egypt. For centuries, mainstream historical fact alert, Thonis-Heracleion served as the primary customs point for all foreign trade entering the Nile. Every single foreign ship, without exception, was required to dock here first, pay their duties, and declare their cargo before being allowed to proceed upriver to the grand capital of Memphis. It was a gold mine for the pharaohs, a veritable cash register ringing endlessly with taxes and tariffs. You can almost hear the ancient accountants sharpening their quills, ready to make sure no one snuck in an extra vase of perfume without paying their dues. As you navigate the crowded thoroughfares, you notice the duality of the city. While the Egyptians called it Thonis, the Greeks knew it as Heracleion, a name given in honor of their hero Heracles, who was said to have visited these shores. Scholars still debate whether Thonis and Heracleion were distinct but adjacent settlements, or simply two names for the very same magnificent city, reflecting the intertwined Egyptian and Greek cultures that flourished here. But regardless of the name, its importance was undeniable. It was a place where cultures didn't just meet, they merged, creating a unique blend of traditions, deities, and architectural styles. You push through a particularly dense crowd near the main thoroughfare and emerge into a grand plaza, dominated by towering temples. The sheer scale of these structures takes your breath away. Massive pylons, carved with intricate hieroglyphs and scenes of gods and pharaohs, reach towards the impossibly blue sky. You can almost feel the sacred energy emanating from within their hallowed walls. This was a city deeply devoted to its gods, particularly to Ammonius-Gerib, the supreme god of the Egyptians, and to the syncretic deity Osiris Canopus, a unique fusion of the Egyptian god of the afterlife and the Greek hero Canopus. Quirky tidbit alert: one of the most prominent temples here was dedicated to Ammonius-Gerib, a local manifestation of Ammonius who was particularly revered in this region, often depicted with a ram's head. Imagine trying to explain that to a tourist from Athens who only knew Zeus. Inside the temple precincts, the air grows cooler, hushed. Priests in white robes move with silent reverence, tending to the sacred rituals. The scent of frankincense and myrrh hangs heavy, intoxicating. You see offerings of bread, fruit, and flowers laid before colossal statues of the gods, their eyes, inlaid with precious stones, seeming to watch over the city. This wasn't just a place of commerce. It was a spiritual anchor, a place where the divine met the mundane, ensuring the prosperity and protection of this vital port. As you wander through the market stalls, you're struck by the sheer variety of goods. Egyptian linen, so fine it feels like spun air, lies next to coarse Nubian leather. Sparkling gold jewelry, intricately crafted, is displayed beside humble clay pottery. You see sacks of grain so enormous they look like small hills, alongside baskets overflowing with dates, pomegranates, and figs. A merchant calls out to you in broken Greek, gesturing towards a pile of exotic spices, cinnamon, cardamom, and pepper, that would fetch a fortune in Rome. You're tempted to haggle, but then you remember you're just visiting, and your ancient Egyptian currency isn't quite valid. Pity you really wanted that ancient souvenir sarcophagus magnet. The sounds of the city follow you everywhere, the rhythmic clanging of a blacksmith's hammer, the distant bleating of goats, the laughter of children playing in the dusty streets. You pass by a scribe, meticulously copying a text onto papyrus, his fingers stained with ink. Nearby, a group of women are weaving, their shuttles clicking like ancient metronomes. Life here is vibrant, industrious, and deeply intertwined with the Nile and the sea that brought both sustenance and wealth. The city breathes, it thrives, it pulses with an energy that seems boundless. This is Thonis-Heracleion in its prime, a magnificent testament to ancient ingenuity and ambition. Its grand harbors are full, its temples echo with prayers, and its markets overflow with the riches of the world. It stands proud, strong, and seemingly invincible, a jewel in Egypt's crown, completely oblivious to the slow, insidious forces that have already begun their subtle work, preparing to reclaim it for the deep. You stir, the faint scent of salt and something vaguely fishy, tickling your nose. The vibrant hum of Thonis-Heracleion, which you just started to feel, now shifts focus, becoming less about the immediate hustle and more about its very reason for being. You find yourself standing not just in a city, but at a pivotal point on the ancient map, a place of immense consequence, almost like the main entrance to a particularly exclusive, highly sought-after club. Only, instead of velvet ropes and a surly bouncer, you've got the vast, shimmering expanse of the Mediterranean Sea stretching out before you, meeting the fertile, life-giving waters of the Nile. This isn't just any port, you see. This is Egypt's maritime gateway, its grand, sweeping front door to the world. Imagine, if you will, that ancient Egypt was a magnificent, treasure-filled mansion. Thonis-Heracleion wasn't just a window you could peek through. It was the only grand, formal entrance where everyone of importance came and went. Its strategic location was, frankly, a stroke of geographical genius, or perhaps just dumb luck that a civilization blossomed right next to it. You stand at the mouth of the canopic branch of the Nile, one of the primary arteries through which the lifeblood of Egypt, its people, its goods, and its very essence, flowed out to the wider world and welcomed the world in. Look around. See how the land gently slopes down to meet the water, forming a natural, sheltered harbor. This wasn't some haphazard collection of docks. This was a purpose-built, divinely blessed, and strategically crucial nexus. For centuries, perhaps even millennia, before its watery slumber, Thonis-Heracleion stood as the indispensable conduit between the rich, fertile Nile Delta and the vast, often turbulent, Mediterranean Sea. It was the place where the sweet, silted waters of the Nile finally mingled with the briny embrace of the ocean, a symbolic and very practical meeting point. Consider the logistics for a moment. If you were a merchant ship, laden with goods from the Greek islands, or perhaps Phoenicia, or even further afield from the sun-drenched coasts of Cyprus, where would you go to trade with the mighty pharaohs? Where would you unload your cargo of timber, silver, or olive oil in exchange for Egypt's legendary grain, papyrus, or gold? You wouldn't just randomly beach your trireme anywhere along the coast, hoping for the best, would you? That would be like trying to deliver a pizza to a skyscraper without knowing the address, just vaguely pointing at the skyline. No, you'd head straight for Thonis-Heracleion, because everyone knew it was the place. This port wasn't merely a convenient stopover. It was the mandated entry point for virtually all foreign trade into Egypt. Think of it as ancient customs and immigration, rolled into one bustling, sun-drenched package. All ships arriving from the Mediterranean were required to dock here first. Why? Control, my sleepy friend, pure and simple control. The pharaohs, being rather keen on knowing exactly what was coming into their meticulously managed kingdom, and more importantly, what taxes they could levy, ensured that Thonis-Heracleion was the choke point, the funnel through which all international maritime commerce passed. This wasn't just about collecting duties. It was about national security, about managing foreign influence, and about asserting the sheer economic power of Egypt. Imagine the scene: a Greek merchant, perhaps named Aristides, has just completed a long, arduous journey across the sea. He's tired, a bit seasick, and probably smells faintly of stale fish and anxiety. He sees the distinctive shoreline of Thonis-Heracleion, the towering pylons of its temples, the busy docks, and a sigh of relief escapes him. He knows that here, and only here, can he officially conduct his business. He can't just sail up the Nile wherever he pleases. That would be like trying to bypass airport security because you're in a hurry. You simply don't do it. This centralized control meant that Egypt could regulate its economy with an iron fist, ensuring a steady flow of revenue and preventing unauthorized goods or, heaven forbid, unauthorized people from slipping in unnoticed. This strategic importance also made Thonis-Heracleion an incredibly wealthy city, a veritable gold mine of trade and tribute. It wasn't just a port, it was a treasury. Taxes on imports and exports filled the pharaonic coffers, funding grand building projects, vast armies, and the lavish lifestyles of the elite. Every crate of timber, every amphora of wine, every bundle of exotic spices that passed through its docks contributed to the immense prosperity of Egypt. This was, in essence, the ancient world's equivalent of a bustling international airport and a major shipping hub combined, only instead of cargo planes and container ships, you had sleek, oared vessels and broad-bellied sailing ships, their sails billowing like giant white clouds against the azure sky. Now, a mainstream historical fact for you: Egypt, throughout much of antiquity, was often referred to as the breadbasket of the ancient world. Its incredibly fertile Nile Delta produced vast surpluses of grain, particularly wheat, which was a fundamental staple for civilizations across the Mediterranean. This immense agricultural output wasn't just for internal consumption. It was a primary export, and guess where much of it departed from? You got it, Thonis-Heracleion. Ships would arrive empty or with foreign goods, load up with mountains of Egyptian grain, and then set sail, feeding empires and fueling economies far beyond the Nile Valley. This single commodity, grain, made Thonis-Heracleion an indispensable cog in the machinery of ancient Mediterranean commerce. But it wasn't just grain. Think of the sheer variety of goods. Papyrus, for instance, the ancient world's paper, was another key export. Imagine scribes across the Mediterranean patiently unrolling scrolls of Egyptian papyrus, their thoughts and decrees immortalized by a plant that grew abundantly along the Nile, and was then shipped out from this very port. Then there were the more exotic goods, precious stones from the desert, gold from Nubia, fine linen woven by skilled Egyptian artisans. And in return, a dazzling array of foreign luxuries and necessities flowed in: timber, which Egypt sorely lacked, metals like copper and tin, fine pottery, olive oil, and sometimes, even more curious items. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Among the finds unearthed from the watery depths of Thonis-Heracleion, archaeologists discovered an abundance of lead weights. Now, weights might not sound thrilling, but these weren't just any weights. Many were marked with symbols indicating their use in trade, but some were unusual, suggesting very specific, perhaps even peculiar, commodities were being weighed and traded here. One theory, based on the specific sizes and markings, suggests that some were used for weighing incredibly precise quantities of precious metals, perhaps even gold dust, or perhaps incredibly rare and valuable spices or perfumes that were traded in minute amounts. It paints a picture of a market so sophisticated, it dealt in both bulk grain and tiny, precious pinches of something exotic and expensive. The very name of the city itself, Thonis-Heracleion, hints at a fascinating dual identity, a point that still sparks scholarly debate. Were Thonis and Heracleion two distinct cities that eventually merged, or was Thonis the Egyptian name and Heracleion the Greek name for the very same place, perhaps reflecting the strong Greek presence and cultural influence here? Historians still argue whether these names represented a seamless linguistic evolution or distinct urban entities closely intertwined by their shared economic destiny. Regardless, the dual nomenclature underscores its role as a true crossroads, a place where Egyptian and Hellenic cultures met, mingled, and often beautifully blended. The sounds here, even now, are a testament to its importance. You can almost hear the rhythmic creak of wooden ships against the docks, the shouted commands of stevedores, the clatter of amphorae being loaded and unloaded, the polyglot chatter of merchants haggling in a dozen different tongues: Egyptian, Greek, Aramaic, Phoenician. It's a symphony of commerce, a constant, bustling soundtrack to the flow of goods and wealth. The smell of exotic spices mixes with the brine of the sea and the earthy scent of the Nile. It's a sensory overload, a testament to its ceaseless activity as the primary artery of Egyptian trade. Imagine the sheer volume of traffic. This wasn't just a few boats a day. This was a constant stream, a maritime highway teeming with life. And because it was so vital, it was also heavily protected. Temples dedicated to the gods, particularly Ammonius Gerib and Khonsu, stood watch over the harbor, their grand facades not just spiritual anchors but also imposing symbols of Egyptian power. Foreigners arriving here would immediately be struck by the majesty and wealth of Egypt, a clear message conveyed by the sheer scale and opulence of the port city itself. It was Egypt's grand welcome mat, but also a formidable display of its might. So, as you stand here, feeling the gentle breeze off the water, you're not just observing a historical site, you're witnessing the beating heart of ancient Egypt's economic and strategic might. Thonis-Heracleion wasn't just a city, it was the essential gateway, the indispensable funnel, the very definition of a critical maritime entrance. It was the place where Egypt breathed out its riches and breathed in the world, a vital, irreplaceable connection that shaped its destiny for centuries. And as you gaze out at the water, you can almost see the ghosts of those ancient ships, their sails full, heading out to sea, or arriving, laden with the treasures of distant lands, all converging on this single, vital point. You stand there, a vital cog in the bustling machinery of Thonis-Heracleion, feeling the vibrant hum of life beneath your feet. But beneath that hum, if you listen very, very closely, there's a different kind of whisper. It's not the murmur of the market, nor the rustle of papyrus, nor the lapping of the Nile against the docks. No, this whisper is from the very earth itself, a low, almost imperceptible groan, a subtle shift that hints at a geological destiny far beyond human comprehension or control. Imagine, if you will, that you're living in a house built on a giant, incredibly slow-motion marshmallow. Each year, the marshmallow settles just a tiny bit more. You wouldn't notice it day to day, perhaps not even year to year. But over decades, your front door might start to stick ever so slightly at the top, or the floor might develop a gentle, almost imperceptible slope towards the back. You'd blame it on faulty construction, perhaps the carpenter who had one too many now beers, or just the natural wear and tear of time. Oh, this old place! You'd chuckle to yourself. Always something new to fix! But what if it wasn't the house, but the ground beneath it? This is the insidious, creeping reality of Thonis-Heracleion. You don't feel a sudden lurch, a dramatic tremor that sends pots clattering from shelves. Those are for later, for the more dramatic chapters of our story. No, this is far more subtle, more unsettling because it's so difficult to pinpoint. It's like trying to watch grass grow, only instead of grass, it's the entire city slowly, gently, subsiding. Think of it as the ultimate slow-motion recline. Your entire world is settling into a permanent, horizontal nap. You might notice it first in the way the water behaves. The Nile, that magnificent, life-giving artery, feels just a fraction closer to the temple steps during the annual flood than it did in your grandfather's time. The marshy edges of the city, once a comfortable distance, seem to encroach a little further onto the paths with each passing decade. You might shrug, attribute it to a particularly heavy flood season, or perhaps the changing course of a minor tributary. The river has its moods, you'd say, pouring yourself another cup of date wine, oblivious to the fact that the river isn't rising so much as the land is sinking. It's a bit like when you swear your trousers are shrinking, but deep down, you know it's probably you expanding. Same principle, just on a much grander, geological scale. The very foundations of the grand temples, those colossal monuments to the gods, are built upon layers of deposited silt and clay brought down by the Nile over millennia. This is the very nature of a delta, a vast, fertile fan of accumulated sediment. And as more and more sediment piles up, and the older layers are compressed under the increasing weight, they compact. It's like stacking books on a sponge. The books get heavier, and the sponge gets flatter. This process, known as sediment compaction, is one of the primary culprits in the quiet drama unfolding beneath Thonis-Heracleion. It's a geological inevitability, a slow-motion squeeze that no amount of prayer or architectural genius could truly halt. Mainstream historical fact: the Nile Delta is a tectonically active region, but its primary subsidence is driven by the compaction of its vast, unconsolidated sediment layers, a process that has been ongoing for thousands of years. This natural compaction means the land literally sinks under its own weight and the weight of new deposits. You, the ordinary citizen, wouldn't have the scientific vocabulary for sediment compaction or isostatic adjustment, which is another fancy geological term for the Earth's crust slowly adjusting its elevation in response to changes in the weight on top of it, like a boat rising or sinking as cargo is added or removed. To you, it's just a feeling. A faint, almost imperceptible tilt in the ground when you walk through the older quarters. A slight crack that reappears in the plaster of your home, no matter how many times you have it repaired. Perhaps the grand processional way to the Temple of Ammonius, once a proud, dry path, now seems to get muddy more frequently, even when it hasn't rained much. You might just think the temple groundskeeper is getting a bit lax with his sweeping, or that the drainage system needs a good clean. There's a subtle, almost eerie quietness that accompanies this slow descent. It's not the sudden, jarring noise of a collapsing building, but the soft creak of timbers settling, the gentle sigh of stone against stone as the ground beneath them yields. It's the kind of sound you might only hear in the dead of night, when the city sleeps, and your mind is free to wander to the unsettling thoughts that daylight usually banishes. Perhaps you lie awake, listening to the distant lapping of the waves, and for a fleeting moment, you wonder if the water sounds just a little bit closer than it used to. You shake your head, blame it on a dream, or perhaps that extra cup of date wine. The ancient Egyptians, practical and observant as they were, certainly noticed changes in their environment. They knew the Nile had its own rhythms, its annual floods, its shifting courses. But understanding the slow, inexorable sinking of the very land they lived on, that was a concept perhaps too vast, too long-term, for their immediate frame of reference. It would be like trying to explain continental drift to someone who still thinks the sun revolves around the Earth. You can point out that Africa and South America look like they fit together, but good luck convincing them that the continents are actually moving. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some ancient texts, particularly those from later periods when the delta was clearly experiencing more dramatic changes, hint at a perceived softness or instability of the land in certain regions. While not explicitly geological, it suggests an intuitive awareness that some areas were less stable than others. There are even mentions in some local folklore of the earth breathing or swallowing things, which might have been early, mystical interpretations of subsidence or sinkholes. Imagine the priests, in their flowing white robes, performing rituals to bind the earth or stabilize the foundations, not out of a scientific understanding of geology, but out of a deep, almost instinctual unease about the ground beneath their feet. Right, more incense, less wobbly bits. You can almost hear a frustrated high priest muttering. Historians still argue whether the ancient inhabitants of Thonis-Heracleion possessed any systematic understanding of the long-term subsidence affecting their city, or if they merely reacted to the immediate symptoms as they arose, attributing them to divine will or the capricious nature of the Nile. It's hard to imagine anyone truly grasping the scale of geological time. To them, the city was eternal, built by the gods, and surely it would stand forever. The idea that the very ground beneath their feet was slowly, imperceptibly giving way, like a sandcastle at the edge of a rising tide, would have been a profoundly unsettling, perhaps even sacrilegious, thought. So you live your life, you trade your goods, you worship your gods, and you try not to think too much about that nagging feeling. That feeling that the ground isn't quite as solid as it once was. That the world is tilting, ever so slightly, towards the water. It's the kind of subtle unease that keeps you from truly relaxing, even on the most beautiful, sun-drenched days. A quiet, geological warning, whispered from the depths of the earth, promising a watery destiny for this magnificent city. And you, in your daily life, are standing right on the precipice of it, utterly unaware of the slow, inevitable slide towards oblivion. You stand at the very edge of the vast Mediterranean, but turn your back to its endless blue for a moment, and instead, immerse yourself in the vibrant, pulsating heart of ancient Thonis-Heracleion. The morning sun, already warm on your skin, casts long, dancing shadows from the masts of countless ships docked along the city's extensive quays. This isn't just a port, it's a living, breathing organism, a symphony of human activity, where every sight, sound, and scent tells a story. Take a deep, slow breath. What do you smell first? Is it the sharp, briny tang of the sea mixed with the earthy aroma of fresh Nile mud? Or perhaps the sweet, cloying perfume of exotic spices being unloaded from a Phoenician galley, mingling with the unmistakable, pungent scent of 1,000 different human endeavors? You might even catch a whiff of something less pleasant, like, say, the collective effluvium of ancient sanitation, which, let's be honest, probably wasn't winning any awards back then. It's a truly ancient kind of hustle, and yes, sometimes that hustle has a distinct aroma. The docks themselves are a chaotic ballet of muscle and movement. You watch as burly dockworkers, their skin glistening with sweat, strain against ropes, hauling immense amphorae filled with olive oil from Crete, or massive bundles of papyrus destined for libraries across the known world. They chant rhythmically, a guttural song that helps them coordinate their efforts, their bare feet slapping against the worn stone. Overhead, the cries of gulls blend with the shouts of foremen, directing the unloading of precious timber from Lebanon, or the careful transfer of glittering gold ingots from Nubia. It's like watching a real-life, incredibly slow-motion game of Tetris, but with much heavier blocks and a lot more grunting. As you step away from the immediate chaos of the ships, you find yourself drawn into the sprawling market districts that spill out from the docks like a vibrant, overflowing river. Here, the air hums with 1,000 conversations, a cacophony of different languages, Egyptian, Greek, Aramaic, even whispers of Cypriot and Libyan. Merchants, with their distinctive robes and varying accents, hawk their wares with a theatrical flair that would make a modern street vendor blush. "Finest linen from the Delta!" one cries, unfurling a bolt of shimmering white fabric. Fresh fish, caught this very morning! Another bellows, gesturing to a basket of glistening Nile perch, already attracting a cloud of very ancient, very persistent flies. You navigate through stalls piled high with goods from every corner of the Mediterranean world. There are baskets overflowing with dates and figs, stacks of intricately painted pottery, and shimmering displays of jewelry crafted from electrum and lapis lazuli. The sheer variety is astounding. You might even spot a vendor selling live animals, perhaps a squawking parrot brought from distant lands, or a basket of sleek, well-fed cats, revered creatures in Egypt, likely destined for a comfortable life chasing mice in a wealthy household. It makes you wonder how many ancient Egyptians were actually cat people before it was cool. One of the fascinating aspects of commerce here is the prevailing system. Mainstream historical fact alert * form much of ancient Egyptian history, particularly in daily transactions like those you witness. The economy operated primarily on a barter system. There was no widespread coinage as we understand it. Instead, goods were exchanged for other goods, or sometimes for a standardized measure of copper or grain. Imagine trying to buy a new tunic by trading 3 baskets of onions and a particularly vocal goat. It certainly made haggling an even more intricate art form. My finest papyrus scrolls for your 5 jars of honey and that very suspicious-looking camel, you might hear someone declare, and then the real negotiation would begin, probably involving a lot of dramatic hand gestures and feigned indignation. As you delve deeper into the market's labyrinthine alleys, you notice specialized sections. Here, the aroma of ground spices overwhelms you: cumin, coriander, cinnamon, and the ever-present frankincense, imported from the land of Punt. Further on, you pass the workshops of artisans, a potter shaping clay on a swiftly spinning wheel, a jeweler meticulously hammering gold into delicate earrings, a scribe meticulously copying hieroglyphs onto a papyrus scroll, his reed pen scratching softly. You can almost feel the collective hum of creativity and industry. But Thonis-Heracleion isn't just about commerce. It's also a profound spiritual center. As you leave the market's clamor behind, the sounds begin to change. The distant chanting of priests drifts on the breeze, growing clearer as you approach the city's sacred heart. Towering temples dedicated to the gods dominate the skyline, their massive pylons reaching towards the azure sky. The most prominent is the Temple of Ammonius Jerub, a truly colossal structure that served as a beacon for sailors entering the Nile mouth. Its polished granite surfaces gleam in the sun, and the air around it feels different, charged with a sense of reverence and ancient power. You step into the temple precinct, and the atmosphere immediately shifts. The boisterous energy of the market gives way to a more subdued, reverent tone. Here, priests in pristine white linen robes move with quiet dignity, overseeing rituals and attending to the needs of the gods. You might see a procession of devotees bringing offerings, baskets of fruit, loaves of bread, small effigies, to be presented before the deity's image. The scent of burning incense is thick here, a sweet, resinous cloud that seems to carry prayers heavenward. The temple courtyards are vast, capable of holding hundreds, even thousands, of people during major festivals. Imagine the sheer spectacle of a religious procession, with priests carrying sacred barks, musicians playing ancient instruments, and the entire city turning out to honor their divine protectors. It's a truly humbling experience, connecting you to the very core beliefs of this ancient civilization. Quirky tidbit alert * while the priests were busy with their sacred duties, the temple complexes often had extensive administrative wings. You might find a whole section dedicated to the temple's economy, managing its vast landholdings, its workshops, and its stores of grain and precious metals. Think of it as ancient Egypt's version of a supersized, tax-exempt conglomerate, but with more incense and fewer quarterly reports. Though, knowing ancient bureaucracy, there were probably still mountains of papyrus records to keep track of everything. I bet they had a specific scribe just for lost and found items. Anyone misplace a sacred ibis? You observe families strolling through the temple grounds, seeking blessings, offering prayers, or simply enjoying the relative calm away from the docks. Children, surprisingly well behaved for the most part, chase pigeons in the courtyards, their laughter a sweet counterpoint to the solemnity. You might even spot a foreign dignitary, perhaps a Greek merchant prince, making an offering to ensure safe passage and prosperity for his trade ventures. The integration of foreign worship into Egyptian temples, particularly for gods like Ammonius, was not uncommon, reflecting the city's cosmopolitan nature. However, even with all this vivid detail, it's worth noting a point of scholarly contention. Scholarly debate phrase * historians still debate the precise population of Thonis-Heracleion at its peak, and how much of its daily life was truly integrated between the Egyptian and Greek communities. While we see evidence of both cultures thriving side by side, the exact nuances of their social interactions, marriage patterns, and daily routines remain subjects of ongoing archaeological and historical research. Were there distinct Greek neighborhoods and Egyptian neighborhoods, or was it a more fluid, intermingled existence? These are the kinds of questions that keep ancient historians up at night, probably clutching a well-worn papyrus scroll and muttering about pottery shards. As the day progresses, the light softens, casting a golden glow over the city. The market, though still active, begins to wind down. Merchants start packing away their remaining wares, and the chatter becomes less frantic, more contented. You can almost hear the collective sigh of a city that has worked hard and is now preparing for a well-deserved evening. Fires are being lit for evening meals, and the aroma of cooking food begins to replace the earlier sense of spices and sweat. The rhythmic creak of ropes from the docks continues, a reminder that even as some activities cease, the heartbeat of the port never truly stops. You watch as families make their way home, perhaps carrying a few purchases from the market, or simply tired from a day of work. The sounds of the city gradually mellow, transforming from a bustling roar into a gentler hum. The last rays of sun catch the golden tips of the temple obelisks, making them glow like ancient beacons. This is Thonis-Heracleion in its prime, vibrant, prosperous, and utterly alive. A city seemingly invincible, a hub of culture and commerce, completely unaware of the slow, insidious forces already at play beneath its very foundations, waiting to claim it. You drift, as if on a gentle current, from the lively clamor of the docks and markets, your senses now drawn by something far older, far more profound. The very air seems to shift, growing heavier, laden with the scent of smoldering incense and the faint echo of ancient chants. You are approaching the sacred heart of Thonis-Heracleion, a collection of towering temples and intimate shrines that were, for its inhabitants and visitors alike, the very anchors of their spiritual lives. It's where the divine met the daily, often with a good bit of gold and a few squawking chickens changing hands. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer scale. Looming above the city's lower structures, like silent, colossal guardians, are the massive pylons of the temple of Ammonius-Gerib. This wasn't just a temple, it was the temple. Ammonius-Gerib was a powerful syncretic deity, a blend of the Egyptian god Ammonius, king of the gods, often associated with the sun and creation, and the local Libyan god Gerib. His cult was incredibly important here, making this temple a major pilgrimage site for people from all over Egypt and beyond. You can almost hear the hushed awe of a farmer from the Delta, visiting for the first time, his jaw practically on the ground. It was like their version of a supersized cathedral, only instead of stained glass, you had hieroglyphs telling stories of gods smiting things and pharaohs looking incredibly buff. As you draw closer, the sheer size of the sandstone blocks used in construction is mind-boggling. How did they even get these things here? No forklifts, no cranes, just a whole lot of human muscle, ropes, and probably a few very exasperated overseers. You can almost feel the cool, polished stone under your fingertips as you pass through a grand gateway, intricately carved with scenes of pharaohs making offerings to the gods, looking perpetually serene and utterly unbothered by the logistics of moving colossal statues. Perhaps they had a divine intervention app for that. Inside the temple complex, the bustling chaos of the port gives way to a different kind of energy, one of reverence, quiet devotion, and the rustle of linen robes. The main sanctuary, dedicated to Ammonius-Gerib, would have been a place of immense power and sanctity. Imagine the priests, their heads shaven smooth, performing elaborate rituals, their voices echoing in the vast, dimly lit halls. The air would be thick with the perfume of myrrh and frankincense, mingling with the faint, earthy smell of the Nile mud used in some of the construction. Sunlight, filtered through narrow clerestory windows high above, would cast long, dramatic shafts of light onto the polished floors, illuminating offerings of bread, beer, and flowers laid out before the divine images. This wasn't just a place for worship, mind you. These temples were massive economic powerhouses. They owned vast tracts of land, employed thousands of people, from priests and scribes to bakers and brewers, and controlled a significant portion of the city's wealth. Think of them as the ancient world's equivalent of a megacorporation, but with more mummified cats and less quarterly earnings reports. Mainstream historical fact alert: temples in ancient Egypt were not merely religious institutions. They were central to the economic, administrative, and social fabric of the state, often serving as granaries, treasuries, and even courts of law. They were basically the one-stop shop for everything, except maybe a good cup of coffee. Beyond the grand temple of Thonis-Heracleion, Thonis-Heracleion was home to other vital sanctuaries. You might find yourself wandering towards the temple dedicated to Khonsu, the moon god, often depicted as a youth with a side lock of hair, sometimes holding a crescent moon. He was also associated with healing, so you can imagine the hopeful whispers of the sick and the lame, seeking solace and cure within his hallowed walls. Perhaps they'd leave a small charm or a prayer written on a papyrus scrap, hoping Khonsu would pull a late-night shift and sort out their ailments. Then there were the temples dedicated to the quintessential Egyptian trinity, Osiris, Isis, and their son Horus. These were particularly important here, given Thonis-Heracleion's role as a major port and its connection to the Nile. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, resurrection, and the annual flooding of the Nile, would have been deeply revered by a city so reliant on the river's bounty. Isis, the divine mother, goddess of magic, healing, and protection, would have offered comfort and hope. And Horus, the falcon-headed god, avenger of his father Osiris, represented kingship and divine order. You can almost picture the solemn processions during festivals, where cult statues of these gods, adorned with precious jewels, would be carried on barks through the city streets, accompanied by chanting priests and the rhythmic beat of drums. One of the more quirky or fringe tidbits about the religious life here might be the discovery of a small, but significant, number of votive offerings depicting Bes, the dwarf god. Bes was a protective deity, often depicted with a lion's mane and tail, and was associated with childbirth, fertility, music, and general good times. He was thought to ward off evil spirits, particularly those that might harm children or new mothers. Finding these little statues or amulets suggests that even in a grand port city focused on major deities, the more personal, domestic, and frankly, fun-loving gods had their place. It's like finding a tiny, ancient garden gnome in the middle of a grand cathedral, a little unexpected, but utterly charming. The syncretism of gods was also a fascinating aspect of Thonis-Heracleion's religious landscape. Given its status as a bustling international port, it wasn't just Egyptian deities who found a home here. Greek merchants and sailors, seeking safe passage and prosperous trade, brought their own gods. You can imagine a subtle merging of beliefs, where Egyptian Isis might be worshipped alongside Greek Aphrodite, or Thonis-Heracleion might find common ground with Zeus. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine spiritual blending or simply a pragmatic approach to ensure everyone felt divinely covered, like having multiple insurance policies for your soul. Was it true spiritual integration, or just ancient religious hedging? A question for the ages, or at least for a very long doctoral thesis. The sacred sites weren't just about grand temples. There would have been smaller shrines, tucked away in quiet courtyards, perhaps dedicated to more localized spirits or family ancestors. Imagine a small, humble offering table, perpetually laden with fresh flowers or a bowl of water, tended by a devout family. The air might be quieter here, the presence of the divine more intimate, less overwhelming than in the vast halls of Thonis-Heracleion. You might even stumble upon a sacred pool, its waters believed to have healing properties, where pilgrims would wash themselves or offer libations. The gentle lapping of water against the stone, the soft cooing of doves, the faint scent of lotus blossoms, it would be a balm for the soul in a city that, for all its glory, was undoubtedly a high-stress environment. Even the very rituals performed within these sacred spaces were a spectacle. Think of the New Year festival, a time of renewal and rebirth, where the cult statue of Ammonius Cherub might be carried in a grand procession down to the Nile, reaffirming the god's connection to the life-giving waters. Or the mysteries of Osiris, performed in hushed tones, reenacting his death and resurrection, bringing comfort and a sense of continuity to the living. These weren't just dusty ceremonies. They were vibrant, living expressions of belief, deeply intertwined with the rhythms of the Nile, and the cycle of life and death that governed ancient Egyptian existence. And let's be honest, any excuse for a good parade and a feast was probably welcomed with open arms. So, as you step back from these sacred sanctuaries, you carry with you not just the image of impressive architecture, but the echoes of devotion, the scent of incense, and the quiet understanding that for the people of Thonis-Heracleion, these temples were far more than just buildings. They were the heart, the soul, and the spiritual compass of their magnificent, bustling, and ultimately, fated city. You stand now, not just on the edge of a great city, but at the very heart of the ancient world's bustling economy, a place where the pulse of the Mediterranean beats strongest. This is Thonis-Heracleion, the definitive crossroads of Mediterranean trade, and trust me, it's far more exciting than your average modern-day customs office, even if the paperwork was probably just as tedious. You can practically feel the hum of commerce vibrating through the very stones beneath your feet, a low thrum of ambition, profit, and the endless exchange of goods. Imagine, if you will, the docks stretching out before you, a forest of masts reaching for the perpetually clear Egyptian sky. These aren't just any docks. They are the arrival and departure lounges for an entire civilization's wealth. From dawn until dusk, and often through the cool, lamplit nights, the air here is thick with the scent of pine pitch, salt spray, and something vaguely exotic, perhaps the lingering aroma of frankincense from a newly arrived shipment, or the pungent tang of drying fish nets. You hear a cacophony of languages swirling around you, the guttural tones of Egyptian, the melodic lilt of Greek, the sharper accents of Phoenician traders, all blending into a symphony of international business. It's like an ancient, very slow-motion TikTok, but instead of viral dances, you get viral trade routes. Your eyes trace the outline of a massive, broad-beamed Egyptian cargo ship, its single square sail furled, settling heavily into its berth. This isn't just a vessel, it's a floating warehouse, packed to the gills with the lifeblood of Egypt. You watch as burly dockworkers, their torsos glistening with sweat, begin the laborious process of unloading. First, the grain. Mountains of golden wheat and barley, the very sustenance of the Roman Empire in later centuries, are funneled from the ship's holds into massive clay jars, then painstakingly counted and recorded by meticulous scribes. This was Egypt's greatest export, its golden ticket, literally feeding millions across the Mediterranean. It's a bit like watching Amazon Prime deliver your groceries, except the delivery truck is a wooden boat and the groceries are enough to feed a small nation for a year. But grain is only the beginning. Next, you see rolls of the finest Egyptian linen, so sheer and delicate you wonder how it survived the journey. Then come bundles of papyrus, the ancient world's paper, ready to carry the wisdom, decrees, and shopping lists of empires far and wide. There are glinting veins of gold, mined from the desert's heart, destined to become coinage or exquisite jewelry for foreign dignitaries. And if you squint, you might even catch a glimpse of a caged exotic animal, perhaps a baboon or a strange bird, destined for a wealthy foreign ruler's private menagerie, because nothing says, "I'm rich," quite like a pet that probably tried to eat the ship's cook. Now turn your gaze to the ships that have just arrived, their holds still full of foreign treasures. From the sun-drenched shores of Greece and the islands of the Aegean, robust amphorae are offloaded, clinking softly as they're carried. These aren't empty, they're brimming with the finest olive oil, a staple for cooking, lighting, and bathing in a land that lacked its own. Alongside them, you see more amphorae, this time filled with rich, dark wine, a welcome luxury in a land that primarily brewed beer. You might even spot a few particularly sturdy jars holding a strange, dark purple liquid, a highly prized dye known as Tyrian purple, so valuable it was often reserved for royalty. It makes you wonder if they had an ancient version of fragile, handle with care stickers, probably just a lot of yelling. From the rugged coastlines of Phoenicia and the cedar forests of Lebanon, you'd see enormous timber logs, some so large they require dozens of men to maneuver. Egypt, rich in everything else, was notoriously poor in quality timber, making these imports vital for shipbuilding, construction, and even the elaborate furniture of pharaohs. Imagine trying to get that through customs today. "Sir, is that a whole tree in your luggage?" Beyond the timber, there's copper from Cyprus, tin from even further afield, perhaps even from distant Britain, though historians still argue whether the direct trade routes extended that far, and silver from the mines of the Greek mainland. These raw materials were the bedrock of ancient industry, transformed by Egyptian artisans into tools, weapons, and magnificent works of art. The docks themselves are a marvel of ancient logistics. You see customs officials, their faces stern, examining manifests written on papyrus scrolls, ensuring that the correct tariffs are paid. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of TSA, but with more linen and less pat-downs. Merchants haggle loudly, their voices rising and falling like the tide, negotiating prices for everything from a handful of spices to an entire shipload of pottery. Interpreters dart between groups, their linguistic agility a testament to the cosmopolitan nature of Thonis-Heracleion. It's a melting pot of cultures, a place where ideas, technologies, and even recipes were exchanged as freely as goods. You could probably find the ancient equivalent of a Greek souvlaki stand right next to an Egyptian kosheri vendor. This wasn't just about moving goods, it was about moving people and ideas. Thonis-Heracleion was where foreign merchants first set foot on Egyptian soil, where Greek pilgrims came to worship at Egyptian temples, and where Egyptian traders learned about the wider world beyond the Nile. It was a place of immense wealth and influence, fueled by the relentless flow of trade. The sheer volume of goods passing through these gates made the city incredibly prosperous, allowing for the construction of grand temples and the maintenance of a sophisticated society, all built on the back of barges and the creak of ship timbers. And you thought your online shopping addiction was bad. These folks were ordering entire forests. The city's strategic location at the mouth of the Nile, where the great river met the Mediterranean Sea, made it irreplaceable. Any ship entering or leaving Egypt had to pass through Thonis-Heracleion, making it the ultimate choke point, the gatekeeper of a kingdom's prosperity. It was the ancient world's Suez Canal, but instead of modern engineering, it relied on the natural flow of the river and the tireless efforts of countless individuals. Every transaction, every loaded ship, every piece of foreign pottery or exotic spice contributed to the city's vibrant tapestry and its immense significance in the ancient Mediterranean economy. This was the place where Egypt truly connected with the world, a bustling, vital hub of exchange and interaction. You stand once more in Thonis-Heracleion, the sun still high, the air thick with the scent of spices, the murmur of 1,000 languages, and the rhythmic creak of ropes on busy docks. But now, if you listen very, very closely, and if you pay attention to the subtle shifts that even the most observant among you might dismiss as mere quirks of the Nile, you begin to perceive it. It's not a tremor, not a sudden lurch, but something far more insidious, like the slow, imperceptible drift of a cloud across the noonday sun. Imagine you're walking along the main street, perhaps heading towards the grand temple of Ammonius Cherub. You've walked this path countless times. Yet, today, you notice a new dampness clinging to the lower stones of a merchant's stall, a dark stain that seems to creep a little higher than it did last week. You shrug it off, perhaps a leaky water skin, or a particularly zealous street cleaner. But then, a few days later, you see it again, on another building, and then another. It's as if the very ground is exhaling a damp, persistent breath from beneath. You stroll down to the bustling docks, where the great ships, laden with goods from distant lands, unload their treasures. The water, which once lapped gently at the lower steps of the quay, now seems to reach a step higher, sometimes two. The dockworkers, accustomed to the ebb and flow of the Nile, might grumble about needing to stretch a bit more to tie off a mooring rope, or perhaps their sandals get a little wetter than usual. "The river's just feeling a bit frisky today," you might hear someone joke, wiping a damp brow. You laugh along, but a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of unease is planted. After all, Thonis-Heracleion sits squarely within the Nile Delta, a geological marvel that is both the source of Egypt's life and, in time, its quiet undoing. This vast, fertile fan of sediment, deposited over millennia by the river's relentless journey, is inherently unstable. It's like building a grand sandcastle on a very, very slow-motion quicksand pit. The change is so gradual, so agonizingly slow, that it becomes part of the background noise of life. It's like watching your hair grow. You never see it happen, but one day, you realize you desperately need a trim. Or, more accurately, it's like that leaky faucet you ignore for months because it's just a drip, until suddenly you have a small pond forming under your sink. Except here, the sink is an entire city, and the drip is the very land beneath your feet. You notice that the lowest rooms in some of the older houses, especially those closer to the water, feel perpetually damp. The cool air, once a welcome respite from the Egyptian sun, now carries a hint of mildew, a faint, earthy smell that wasn't there before. You might find yourself placing a small, flat stone under the leg of a wobbly table, not because the table is uneven, but because the floor itself seems to have settled. Builders, called to fix a sagging doorway or a cracked wall, might scratch their heads, attributing it to poor craftsmanship or the passage of time. They reinforce foundations, lift door frames, and patch cracks, never quite grasping that the problem isn't the structure, but the ground it rests upon. Imagine a priest, meticulous in his daily rituals, entering the sacred inner sanctum of the Temple of Ammonius. He kneels before the altar, but his knees feel a peculiar chill from the stone floor, a cold dampness that seems to seep up through the very bedrock. He might attribute it to the coolness of the deep temple, or perhaps a minor leak in the roof he hadn't noticed. He wouldn't think, not for a moment, that the sacred ground itself was beginning a long, slow descent. For generations, the land had been stable, a constant. The idea of the earth simply deciding to lower itself was utterly alien to their understanding of the world. After all, the earth was the earth, solid and unmoving, wasn't it? Well, not always. This imperceptible sinking, known as subsidence, is a common geological phenomenon in delta regions worldwide. The weight of the accumulated sediment, combined with natural compaction, causes the land to slowly settle. For Thonis-Heracleion, this natural process was compounded by factors like the shifting course of the Nile, which altered sediment deposition patterns, and possibly even the sheer weight of the city itself. Historians still argue whether the inhabitants of Thonis-Heracleion had any true scientific understanding of land subsidence, or if they simply attributed the rising water levels to the whims of the gods or an unusually high Nile flood season. Most likely it was the latter. Why would you suspect the ground itself was betraying you? You might hear a quirky tale circulating among the fishermen, a fringe tidbit whispered around evening fires. They speak of certain ancient markers, stones placed by their grandfathers to mark the best fishing spots, that now lie deeper beneath the waves, sometimes completely submerged. They don't attribute it to the land sinking, but rather to the sea growing hungrier, or the Nile stretching its arms wider. One old fisherman might even claim he saw a sacred crocodile, usually basking on a particular bank, now having to swim to reach it. Small, odd observations that accumulate, yet never quite coalesce into a clear, terrifying realization. The Port Authority, always busy with the comings and goings of ships, might notice that the deepest drafts require a bit more careful navigation than before, or that certain channels seem to be silting up faster. Dredging operations, a constant necessity in a river delta, might become more frequent, more urgent. But again, these are operational challenges, not existential threats. You'd think they'd connect the dots, wouldn't you? Like when you keep tripping over the same rug and blame the rug, instead of realizing you just need to move your feet. But the rug, here was the entire city, and moving your feet wasn't an option. As the years turn into decades, the subtle changes become less subtle, though still gradual. What was once a minor inconvenience, a damp patch, a slightly higher watermark, now starts to affect daily life more noticeably. The steps leading down to the water from the main thoroughfares, once comfortably above the waterline, are now often submerged, requiring you to wade through shallow water to board a ferry. Merchants with stalls closest to the water's edge find themselves regularly sweeping out small pools of water that have seeped in overnight. They learn to build their storage platforms higher, or they move their most valuable goods to upper floors. It's an adaptation, not yet a panic. The city breathes, lives, and slowly, imperceptibly, begins its descent. It's like a giant, ancient ship, incredibly slow, incredibly heavy, taking on water, drop by silent drop. No alarm bells ring, no clarions sound. Just the quiet, relentless work of geology, patiently, insidiously, beginning to reclaim what it once laid down. The vibrant life of Thonis-Heracleion continues, oblivious to the fact that its very foundations are slowly, deliberately, giving way to the encroaching waters. You've felt the ground whisper, a subtle shift beneath your sandals, like a giant sigh from the earth itself. But now, imagine that sigh turning into a groan, a rumble, and then a full-throated roar. One moment you're haggling over a clay pot, maybe admiring a shiny scarab amulet, because, let's be honest, who doesn't love a good scarab? And the next, the world decides it wants to do a little jig. Not the fun kind, mind you. This is the kind of jig where the ground beneath your feet decides to impersonate a particularly enthusiastic trampoline. The first tremor hits, a low, guttural growl that vibrates up through the soles of your feet, through your bones, right into your teeth. It's a sound that isn't really a sound, more of a feeling, a deep-seated hum that makes the very air feel thick and heavy. You stumble, grabbing for the nearest pillar, a market stall, anything to steady yourself as the ground lurches, not once, but in a series of jarring, violent shoves. The meticulously stacked amphorae in the market, moments ago brimming with olive oil and wine, now clatter and crash, their contents spilling across the dusty ground, turning patches of earth into greasy, dark pools. A merchant's carefully balanced pyramid of dates tumbles, scattering sweet, sticky fruit everywhere, a minor tragedy in the grand scheme of things, but in that moment, it feels like the end of the world for him. Dust rises in choking clouds as mortar crumples from stone, and the distant, rhythmic thud of the great temple's massive blocks seems to echo the earth's own angry pulse. You watch in horror as cracks, thin as spiderwebs at first, then widening into gaping maw-like fissures, snake across the plastered walls of houses. A section of a less sturdy portico might just decide it's had enough and collapses with a groan of tortured wood and a shower of masonry. The air fills with the shouts of people, a mix of fear, confusion, and the instinctual cry for the gods. It's a symphony of chaos, punctuated by the sharp crack of breaking timber and the dull thud of falling stone. You instinctively duck, covering your head, wishing you'd paid more attention in that ancient Egyptian earthquake preparedness class, assuming they had one, which, let's be real, they probably didn't. They were more into mummification and pyramid building, which, while impressive, don't help much when the ground is trying to swallow you whole. These aren't isolated incidents, these quakes. Thonis-Heracleion sits in a particularly unlucky spot, geologically speaking. The eastern Mediterranean is a notoriously active seismic zone, a veritable playground for tectonic plates that just can't seem to get along. For centuries, these plates have been grinding and bumping, creating tremors that would ripple across the land, sometimes small enough to merely rattle the jars on a shelf, sometimes powerful enough to resculpt the coastline. It's a bit like living on a very large, very slow, and incredibly grumpy waterbed. And every now and then, that waterbed decides to really bounce. Historians still argue whether a single, catastrophic earthquake delivered the final blow or if it was a series of relentless seismic events, like a slow-motion boxing match where the city was the perpetually unlucky punching bag. What is clear, however, is that each significant tremor chipped away at the city's foundations, literally and metaphorically. Buildings, already stressed by the slow subsidence, found their structural integrity compromised. Pillars leaned, walls bowed, and the very ground beneath them, already waterlogged and soft, became even more unstable, almost like trying to build a sandcastle on a rapidly deflating air mattress. And then there's the water. The sea, usually a bustling friend, bringing in ships and bounty, occasionally transforms into a terrifying, vengeful entity. You've felt the ground shake, But now, imagine the world going eerily silent for a moment after a particularly violent tremor. The birds stop singing. The distant murmur of the waves seems to vanish. And then, a strange, unsettling phenomenon unfolds before your eyes. The water in the harbor, which moments ago lapped gently at the docks, suddenly begins to recede. Not just a little, but dramatically, pulling back from the shore, exposing muddy seabed, revealing startled fish flopping in the newly exposed shallows, and leaving stranded fishing boats listing precariously on the suddenly dry ground. It's an unnerving sight, almost supernatural, as if the very sea is holding its breath. Or perhaps, just going to fetch a bigger wave. This eerie withdrawal is the chilling prelude to the relentless push of a tsunami. From the distant horizon, a dark line appears, a smudge against the blue, growing rapidly, ominously. It's not a wave you surf, it's a wall of water, a liquid mountain, gathering speed and height, propelled by the unimaginable force of a distant underwater earthquake. As it approaches, the low growl returns, but this time it's the roar of 1,000,000 tons of water, a sound that promises nothing but utter devastation. When the tsunami hits, it's not a gentle lapping. It's an explosion of water. The sheer force is unimaginable. Imagine the largest dam breaking, combined with a freight train made entirely of liquid. The wave crashes over the outer sea walls, if any still stand, sweeping inland with terrifying speed. It smashes into the docks, splintering timbers, tossing ships like toy boats, even the largest trading vessels, the ones that felt so grand and imposing, are now just driftwood in the grip of this watery monster. You see them lifted, spun, and then slammed back down, or carried far inland, left marooned in what were once bustling marketplaces. The salty spray whips through the air, stinging your eyes, as the wave engulfs the lower parts of the city. Buildings that had valiantly withstood the tremors now buckle under the immense hydraulic pressure. The water surges through streets, ripping through homes, carrying away everything in its path: market stalls, carts, furniture, and tragically anyone too slow, too infirm, or too unlucky to escape its grasp. The sacred sanctuaries, those towering temples that seemed so immutable, are suddenly vulnerable. Water rushes through their courtyards, swirling around their massive columns, perhaps even undermining their very foundations. It's a chilling reminder that even the most devout architecture is no match for Mother Nature having a really bad day. These tidal surges, often triggered by the same tectonic shifts that caused the earthquakes, weren't just about the immediate destruction. They were also about the long-term saturation. As the water receded, it left behind a trail of mud, debris, and critically, a deeper, more pervasive level of waterlogging. The already soft, silted ground became even more saturated, further weakening its ability to support the heavy structures built upon it. It was like trying to build a house on a sponge that was constantly being squeezed and then re-soaked. The foundations, already under stress from the slow subsidence, simply couldn't cope with the added instability. The cumulative effect of these seismic events and tsunamis was devastating. Imagine a city that's slowly sinking, like a leaky boat taking on water, and then suddenly, a giant comes along and starts stomping on it. Each earthquake was a violent shake, loosening the structure, causing immediate collapse and accelerating the ground's downward creep. Each tsunami was a massive wash, eroding the land, undermining foundations, and pushing the city further into its watery grave. It wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic poof, and the city was gone, like Atlantis in a bad movie. Instead, it was a brutal, relentless process, a series of shocks that compounded the existing, insidious problem. The inhabitants, despite their ingenuity and resilience, must have felt a profound sense of helplessness. They could rebuild a wall, perhaps, or clear the debris from a street. But how do you rebuild a stable foundation when the very earth beneath you is constantly shifting and sinking? How do you defend against a wall of water that appears from the horizon and swallows everything in its path? It's like trying to bail out a bathtub with a teaspoon while someone else is simultaneously turning on the tap and drilling holes in the bottom. You can try, bless their hearts, but the odds are stacked against you. Ancient records and archaeological evidence suggest periods of intense seismic activity aligned with the city's decline. For instance, there's evidence of a major earthquake in the region around the 2nd century BC, which could have been one of the significant accelerators. A fringe tidbit here: some ancient Egyptian texts, particularly those discussing the mythological chaos before creation, have been interpreted by a few scholars as containing veiled references to natural disasters, possibly even tsunamis, suggesting a cultural memory of such devastating events. While not directly about Thonis-Heracleion, it hints at an awareness of the Earth's unpredictable fury. You stand amidst the chaos, the lingering smell of salt and damp earth in the air, the sound of creaking timber, and distant cries still echoing. The immediate terror might subside, but the knowledge that this could happen again, that the very ground beneath your feet is untrustworthy, that the sea can turn from friend to foe in an instant, would linger like a cold dread. The bustling daily life, which you witnessed just moments ago, is now shattered, replaced by the grim reality of a city under siege by the very forces of nature. The slow, watery sinking, once a creeping inevitability, has now found its accelerators, speeding up Thonis-Heracleion's journey to its silent, submerged future. You stand now, not just on the edge of a great city, but on the very edge of a geological paradox, the Nile Delta. Imagine a vast, sprawling hand, its fingers reaching out to the sea, each one a branch of the mighty Nile. This isn't solid, unyielding ground like the granite mountains of the south. Oh no, this is a living, breathing, shifting landscape, a place where the earth itself has a mind of its own, and a rather unpredictable one at that. It's like trying to build a sandcastle on a waterbed, only the waterbed is also slowly deflating. Good luck with that permit application, right? Feel the soft, yielding soil beneath your bare feet. It's a rich, dark loam, incredibly fertile, the very lifeblood of Egypt. Every year, for millennia, the Nile has brought down billions of tons of this precious sediment from the heart of Africa. It's a truly staggering amount of material, enough to build entire mountains if it weren't spread out so thinly. This annual gift, the inundation, was the cornerstone of Egyptian civilization. It nourished their crops, replenished their fields, and provided the very foundation for their existence. It's a mainstream historical fact, taught in every school, that without the annual flooding of the Nile, ancient Egypt simply wouldn't have been. They even personified it as the god Happy, often depicted with pendulous breasts, signifying fertility and abundance. A bit of a quirky image for a river god, but it certainly got the message across. This river was the ultimate provider. But this constant deposition of sediment, while life-giving, also carried a hidden danger for a city like Thonis-Heracleion. You see, the Nile Delta isn't just building land, it's also constantly rearranging it. The river, like a particularly restless child, never stays in one place for long. Its branches, the arteries of the delta, are constantly silting up, carving new paths, or abandoning old ones. One year, a branch might be a wide, navigable highway to the sea. The next, it could be a sluggish, choked-up trickle, barely able to float a fishing skiff. It's the ultimate in dynamic geography, making it incredibly difficult to plan long-term infrastructure. Imagine if your local highway just decided to pack up and move every few decades. You'd be late for everything. This constant fluvial dance meant that the very access to Thonis-Heracleion, its lifeline as a port, was perpetually at risk. Picture the grand ships, laden with goods, approaching the city. They rely on deep, clear channels. But what happens when the river, in its infinite wisdom, decides to deposit a massive sandbank right in the middle of the main thoroughfare? Or when the branch leading directly to your docks suddenly starts to narrow, becoming more of a muddy ditch than a bustling waterway? The answer, of course, is chaos. Merchants would grumble, captains would curse, and the city's economic engine would sputter. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic event, but a slow, insidious process, like trying to untangle a particularly stubborn knot of fishing line that just keeps getting tighter. And it wasn't just about navigation. The very ground beneath Thonis-Heracleion was, in essence, a giant, unstable pile of silt and clay. While the Nile's yearly deposits built up the land, they also added immense weight to the underlying strata. This, combined with natural geological processes, which we've touched on before, remember the subtle shifts, led to a phenomenon called deltaic subsidence. Essentially, the delta was slowly, inexorably sinking under its own weight and the pressure of the accumulating sediment. It's like piling too many books on a flimsy shelf. Eventually, it just starts to sag. And if you're building temples and massive stone structures on that shelf, well, you can imagine the structural engineers of the day probably had a few choice words, if they even understood the problem. Historians still argue whether this localized deltaic subsidence or broader eustatic sea level rise was the primary driver of the city's eventual watery fate, or perhaps a devastating combination where each accelerated the other's destructive power. It's a bit like debating whether the straw that broke the camel's back was made of wheat or rye. The camel still broke its back, didn't it? You can almost feel the ground sighing beneath you, slowly, imperceptibly giving way. The Egyptians, masters of their river, understood its moods. They built elaborate systems of canals and dikes to manage its waters, to harness its fertility. But controlling the entire delta, forcing a colossal river system to behave exactly as you wish, is like trying to convince a toddler to sit still during a particularly exciting cartoon. It's a losing battle. The Nile, in its raw, untamed power, was a force that defied absolute human control. Imagine the priests, standing by the Nile, offering prayers for a good inundation, for the river to be bountiful but not destructive. They understood the delicate balance. But even they, with all their wisdom and reverence, could not stop the river from gradually shifting its course away from the city's main harbors, or from depositing sediment in inconvenient places, or from slowly eroding the very coastline that protected the city from the sea. It was a constant, low-grade siege, not by an invading army, but by the very land and water that sustained them. The Nile was a fickle friend, indeed. It gave life with one hand, and subtly, slowly, took away the ground beneath their feet with the other. As the centuries rolled on, the cumulative effect of these deltaic shifts became undeniable. What was once a deep, easily navigable channel might become shallower, forcing larger vessels to anchor further out, requiring smaller boats to ferry goods to shore. This adds time, cost, and complexity. What was once firm ground along the riverbank might become waterlogged, marshy, or even succumb to erosion, with chunks of land simply crumbling into the river. You see the subtle signs everywhere, the foundations of buildings closer to the water becoming perpetually damp, the increasing frequency of minor floods that seem to creep further inland, even when the annual inundation wasn't particularly high. It was the land itself subtly changing its mind about where it wanted to be. The Nile Delta, in its essence, is a zone of constant flux. It's a geological dance between creation and destruction, deposition and erosion. And Thonis-Heracleion, magnificent as it was, found itself caught in the middle of this dance, a partner slowly being pushed towards the exit. The very engine of Egypt's prosperity, the Nile, was also, in its natural, untamed state, contributing to the city's slow, watery demise. It's a rather ironic twist of fate, isn't it? The giver of life, also the slow, persistent agent of decline. It's as if your very best friend accidentally kept tripping you on the way to a party. Over and over again. Eventually, you just stop going. You stand now, not just as an observer, but as a silent witness to a slow-motion drama, a battle against an enemy that doesn't roar or brandish swords, but merely creeps. Imagine the water, not rushing in a devastating tsunami, but simply, incrementally, ever so slightly higher each year. It's like watching a particularly slow-motion game of Jenga where the bottom layer is quietly, imperceptibly, being dissolved. What do you do when the ground itself is betraying you? You feel the dampness seeping into your sandals, a chill that wasn't there last season. The market stalls, once so robustly planted on dry ground, now have their lowest timbers perpetually wet. At first, it's a minor inconvenience, a bit of extra mud to track through. Perhaps you grumble about the Nile being particularly high this year, or blame the gods for a heavier rainy season. You might even joke, with a nervous laugh, that soon the fish will be swimming right through your front door. Little do you know, that punchline is a spoiler for the city's entire future. Initially, the response is individual, almost instinctive. You'd see families raising their doorsteps, adding a new course of sun-dried bricks to their foundations. It's a common sight in flood-prone areas even today, a sort of architectural shrug of resignation. Oh, the water's a bit high. Fine, we'll just build up. Imagine the local carpenter, arms crossed, surveying a waterlogged porch and sighing. Well, guess we need another step. At this rate, my grandkids will live in a lighthouse on stilts. A bit dramatic, perhaps, but it captures the spirit of the moment. You watch as they haul in rubble, broken pottery, anything to elevate their homes, their shops, trying to keep their feet dry and their wares from spoiling. There's a quiet resilience in this, a stubborn refusal to be defeated by a few inches of extra water. For the grander structures, the temples, the public buildings, the ones built by the pharaohs themselves, the problem is more profound. You can't just add a step to the base of a colossal pylon. Here, the efforts might have been more communal, more organized, though still largely reactive. Perhaps the temple priests, ever keen to maintain the sanctity of their gods' abodes, would order the clearing of silt from around the temple walls, hoping to slow the water's relentless embrace. You might see gangs of laborers, sweating under the Egyptian sun, shoveling mud from around the mighty columns of the temple of Ammonius-Jerub, a futile gesture against the very ground sinking beneath them. It's like trying to bail out a leaky boat with a teacup while the hull is slowly dissolving. The city's lifeblood, its port, faces a different kind of challenge. As the land subsides, the harbor itself becomes shallower in some areas, deeper in others, and the channels leading to the Nile become more erratic. You can almost hear the exasperated cries of ship captains, navigating ever-shifting sandbars and submerged obstacles. The port authorities, responsible for keeping trade flowing, would undoubtedly have invested in dredging operations. Think of teams of men, perhaps with simple scoops and baskets, or even more complex drag nets, trying to clear the shipping lanes, to maintain the vital arteries of commerce. This was a common practice in ancient Egyptian river management, a mainstream historical fact that demonstrates their understanding of hydrological engineering. They were adept at managing the Nile's floods, building canals, and maintaining irrigation systems. But this was different. This wasn't just managing the river, it was fighting the earth itself. The most ambitious, yet perhaps ultimately futile, efforts would have been the construction of protective barriers. You might envision low dikes or rudimentary sea walls, perhaps made of packed earth or stone, hastily erected along the most vulnerable waterfronts. These wouldn't be the massive concrete barriers of modern times, but more like desperate sandcastles against an incoming tide. And yet, they would have offered a temporary psychological comfort, a visible sign that something was being done. You can almost hear the city elders debating. Should we build higher? Stronger? Or just pray harder? Historians still argue whether the scale of these protective measures was ever truly proportionate to the slow, insidious threat they faced. Some scholars suggest that comprehensive, citywide flood defenses, as we understand them today, were simply beyond their technological capabilities or their conceptual grasp of such a long-term, geological phenomenon. Consider the sheer scale of the problem. It wasn't just a high tide, it was the ground itself sinking, often by mere millimeters a year. This slow, almost imperceptible descent made it incredibly difficult for the inhabitants to grasp the true nature of their predicament. How do you fight something you can barely see happening? It's not a sudden invasion. It's more like watching your favorite houseplant slowly wilt because you forgot to water it for 6 months. You only notice it when it's too late. There's a quirky tidbit about ancient Egyptian beliefs that might shed light on their outlook. They often attributed natural phenomena to the will of the gods. A particularly bad flood or an earthquake wasn't just geology. It was the wrath of Sobek, the crocodile god, or the rumbling discontent of Geb, the earth god. So, alongside any practical measures, you can bet there were countless rituals, offerings, and prayers directed to the pantheon. Imagine the priests, robed in white linen, leading solemn processions to the water's edge, chanting incantations and sacrificing choice cuts of meat, hoping to appease the deities and convince the waters to recede. Oh, mighty happy, Lord of the inundation, please don't let our temple become a new fish pond. It was a blend of pragmatic engineering and profound spiritual supplication. The very slowness of the process was Thonis-Heracleion's undoing in terms of effective resistance. If a massive flood had wiped out half the city overnight, the survivors might have immediately rebuilt on higher ground or abandoned the site en masse. But this was a drip, drip, drip. Each generation adapted, raised their homes a little, cleared their channels a little, perhaps even developed a local dialect where common greetings included phrases like, "May your floors stay dry." It was a frog and slowly boiling water scenario. The cost, the sheer effort, the political will required to relocate an entire city, or to undertake truly massive engineering projects against a threat that wasn't immediately catastrophic, was simply not there. Why spend vast sums moving your entire city when the water is only ankle deep in the streets? You just wade through it. And so you observe the slow, agonizing process of adaptation turning into resignation. The efforts, initially robust and hopeful, begin to wane. The new generation, born into a slightly wetter city, might accept it as the norm. They might build boats instead of chariots, or learn to fish in what used to be the town square. The constant battle, the endless repairs, the sinking feeling, pun absolutely intended, of futility would eventually wear down even the most determined spirit. The city was not abandoned in a sudden exodus, but rather, it slowly, painfully, became less viable, less central. The lifeblood of trade, which once coursed so vigorously through its arteries, found new veins, new ports to call home. The fight wasn't lost in a single dramatic moment, it was simply exhausted. The relentless lapping of the water, once a soothing backdrop to the city's vibrant life, has now become a constant, insidious reminder. You stand on what was once a bustling street, but now the water laps around your ankles, a chill seeping into your sandals. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint, metallic tang of the encroaching sea. This isn't a sudden cataclysm, no dramatic cinematic flood, but a slow, agonizing surrender. It's like watching a really long, incredibly sad documentary about a leaky faucet, except the faucet is the Mediterranean and your entire life is the floor getting soaked. You remember the early days, not so long ago, when the water was just a nuisance. A bit of flooding in the lower districts, easily pumped out, or so everyone believed. You'd see merchants grumbling as they laid down new planks over perpetually damp floors, or priests muttering incantations to placate increasingly agitated water deities. People tried to adapt. They built higher foundations, reinforced walls, even constructed makeshift wooden walkways over submerged alleys. It was a Herculean effort, a collective denial that the very ground beneath their feet was dissolving into liquid history. You joke with your neighbors, "Well, at least we won't have to clean the streets anymore. The Nile is doing it for us." But the laughter would die in your throat as you looked at the ever-rising waterline on the temple walls. The first whispers of true abandonment weren't spoken in shouts of panic, but in the quiet, resigned sighs of families packing. You see it in the way a potter carefully wraps his finest amphory, not for sale, but for transport to a new, uncertain home upriver. You watch a baker, his hands usually dusted with flour, now brushing away salt crystals from his treasured kneading trough. The city isn't emptying in a rush, but in a trickle, a slow, painful hemorrhage of its lifeblood. It's like trying to get teenagers to leave a party. It happens eventually, but oh, the dragging of feet and the endless. Just 5 more minutes. The wealthiest families, the ones with connections and resources, were often the first to go. They could afford to dismantle their homes, transport their goods, and secure land in safer, higher ground like Sais or Memphis, or even the burgeoning new city of Alexandria. You're left with the poignant image of grand barges, once laden with exotic goods from distant lands, now piled high with family heirlooms, furniture, and even the occasional bewildered pet cat, sailing away from the sinking port. These were not voyages of trade, but of sorrowful exodus. For the common folk, the artisans, the laborers, the street vendors, the decision was agonizing. This city, Thonis-Heracleion, was their entire world. Generations had lived and died here. Their livelihoods were tied to its docks, its markets, its temples. To leave meant severing ties with everything they knew, risking destitution in an unknown land. You hear hushed conversations in the dwindling taverns, debates over whether to try their luck in agriculture further inland, or seek work in the stone quarries of Upper Egypt, or even try to become a fisherman in some other, less waterlogged delta town. The city's spiritual heart also began to dim. The priests, who had tirelessly performed rituals to appease the gods and halt the waters, found their efforts increasingly futile. The grand temple of Ammonius-Cherub, once a beacon of spiritual power, now had its lowest chambers perpetually flooded. The sacred barks, used in great processions, sometimes had to be floated inside the temple itself. You see the priests, their faces etched with weariness, performing truncated rituals, their voices echoing in the damp, empty halls. They, too, begin to prepare for departure, carefully rolling up sacred papyri, dismantling portable altars, and in a quirky, fringe tidbit, you might even hear whispers of a particular cult, the keepers of the sacred stone, who insisted on carrying a massive, waterlogged obelisk with them, believing it held the city's spirit. Talk about a moving challenge! Imagine trying to get that through a narrow doorway. The silence grows. The once vibrant clamor of the port, the shouts of porters, the haggling of merchants, the braying of donkeys, all fade into a muted, watery hush. You hear only the drip, drip, drip of water from stone, the soft slosh of waves against submerged foundations, and the occasional creak of an abandoned wooden dock. The air, once thick with the aroma of spices and fresh bread, now carries the damp, earthy smell of decay. It's the smell of a home slowly becoming a tomb. You see the marks on the walls, the high water lines etched by time and tide, creeping higher and higher. Each new mark is a fresh wound, a new layer of despair. Families, who had held out hope, who had clung to their homes with desperate tenacity, finally break. You witness the painful scene of a mother trying to explain to her bewildered child why their home, the only one they've ever known, is now a pond. "We're going on an adventure, little one," she might whisper, her voice thick with unshed tears, knowing full well it's an escape, not an adventure. The abandonment isn't just about moving physical possessions, it's about the erosion of identity. For centuries, to be from Thonis-Heracleion meant something. It meant being part of Egypt's Grand Gateway, a citizen of a city blessed by gods and trade. Now, it means being a refugee, a displaced person, someone who had to flee their home because the very ground beneath them gave way. Historians still debate whether the final exodus was a coordinated government effort, perhaps with some meager state assistance for resettlement, or a chaotic, family-by-family scramble for survival, each household left to fend for itself against the rising waters. The truth was likely a messy blend of both, with official pronouncements often falling short of practical reality. As the population dwindles, the remaining inhabitants become a somber community of the doomed. They help each other salvage what they can, sharing what little food and resources remain. The sense of shared loss binds them, even as their numbers shrink day by day. You see them gather at the highest points, looking out at the ever-expanding watery expanse, a silent vigil for a dying city. It's like the last few people at a party, long after the music has stopped, just lingering because no one quite wants to be the very last to leave. Ancient Egyptian cities, particularly those in the Delta, often faced challenges with shifting riverbeds and sedimentation. Thonis-Heracleion's plight, therefore, was a heightened version of a familiar struggle, but on a scale that proved insurmountable. The people of Thonis-Heracleion were not just battling the sea, they were battling the very geology of their world, a battle no human endeavor, no matter how grand, could ever truly win. The slow, painful abandonment becomes the city's final, drawn-out breath. You see the last boats puttering away, the figures on board turning for one last, lingering look at the diminishing skyline, their faces a mixture of grief and relief. The once vibrant port, now a ghost town, slowly, inexorably, slips beneath the waves, its memory destined to become a whisper on the wind. You stand on what was once the city's highest, most defiant point, perhaps the very peak of a grand temple pylon dedicated to Ammonius-Cherub, or the uppermost floor of a wealthy merchant's villa, now just a lonely island in an ever-expanding, shimmering sea. The air is thick with the silence of absence, broken only by the relentless, soft lapping of water against stone, a sound that has become the city's new heartbeat. The sun, indifferent, casts long, watery reflections that dance across the submerged ruins, playing tricks on your eyes, making you wonder if you're seeing ghosts of grand bazaars or just the refraction of light on a watery tomb. The last inhabitants, those stubborn souls who clung to hope or simply had nowhere else to go, have finally conceded. You can almost hear the creak of the last few, hastily constructed rafts, laden with the most precious, portable remnants of a life once lived here, a family's worn grinding stone, a small, painted wooden statuette of a household god, a bundle of papyrus scrolls, damp and heavy with the wisdom of ages. They paddled away, their backs to the dying city, their faces grim, perhaps whispering a final prayer to Osiris, god of the underworld, now also the god of this watery one. It's a somber farewell, not with a bang, but with a sorrowful, watery sigh. The water, once a distant threat, then an unwelcome guest in the lower districts, is now the undisputed ruler. It has claimed the streets where merchants once haggled over exotic spices and fine linen, where priests led solemn processions, and where children played games with sun-baked clay figures. Now, only schools of curious, darting fish navigate these ancient thoroughfares, their scales glinting like scattered jewels in the filtered light. It's almost comical, if you think about it, the ultimate real estate flip, from prime commercial property to a luxury aquatic residence. I'd bet the local fish had some excellent real estate deals, moving into those grand temples. Prime location, excellent views, and no noisy human neighbors complaining about the wet conditions. You observe the final, agonizing moments. A segment of a once proud temple wall, its hieroglyphs faded by the sun and now bleached by the brine, tilts precariously. The mortar, weakened by centuries of slow erosion and the insistent, microscopic work of water, finally gives way. With a soft, almost polite shh chunk, it slides beneath the surface, sending a ripple across the water that quickly fades. Then another. And another. Each collapse is a tiny, private funeral for a piece of history. The great pylons, those monumental gateways that once heralded the grandeur of Ammonius Temple, are now little more than truncated stumps, their tops just breaking the surface like the backs of sleeping giants. One by one, as the land continues its imperceptible, geological sag, and as the Nile's shifting sediments redistribute weight beneath the city's foundations, even these last sentinels begin their final descent. You witness the last visible apex of a towering obelisk, once a beacon for ships sailing into the Nile, slowly, inexorably disappear. It doesn't plunge dramatically, it simply melts away, as if dissolved by the water's embrace, leaving only a widening circle of ripples in its wake. This wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic flood, but a slow, almost courteous absorption. It was the ultimate, drawn-out goodbye, the kind that lets you savor every last tear. It's a strange sensation, watching a city die this way. Not in fire or conquest, but in a slow, insidious surrender to the very element that once sustained its lifeblood. The very mud and silt of the Nile Delta, which had made the land fertile and the city prosperous, now became its liquid grave. The unique architectural methods employed by the Egyptians, designed to manage the annual floodwaters and the shifting deltaic soil, proved insufficient against the relentless, permanent rise of the sea level coupled with the land's own subsidence. Archaeologists still debate whether the final abandonment was a sudden, catastrophic event triggered by a particularly severe storm or earthquake, or a prolonged, mournful trickle over decades, perhaps even centuries, as the last residents finally gave up the ghost. Given the evidence, it leans heavily towards the latter, a slow-motion tragedy playing out over generations. Think of the sheer scale of the abandonment. It wasn't just a few people moving house. This was an entire metropolis, once Egypt's primary maritime gateway, slowly emptying out. The city's decline wasn't just about the water, either. A significant mainstream historical fact is that the founding of Alexandria by Alexander the Great in 331 BC and its rapid subsequent development as the new premier port of Egypt profoundly impacted Thonis-Heracleion. As Alexandria grew, absorbing more and more trade and political importance, Thonis-Heracleion's strategic significance waned. This meant less investment, less political will, and fewer resources dedicated to combating the encroaching waters. Why save a drowning city when you've built a shiny new one just down the coast? It's like upgrading your phone and then just letting your old one get rained on. As the highest structures vanish, the water becomes a smooth, unbroken surface, reflecting the sky as if Thonis-Heracleion had never existed. The great harbor, once teeming with triremes, merchant ships, and now barges, is now just another part of the open sea. You can almost hear the ghostly echoes of dockworkers shouting, the creak of ship timbers, the multilingual babble of traders from across the Mediterranean. But now, there is only the whisper of the wind and the endless murmur of the waves. Forget about taking a chariot. You need a very sturdy canoe, and maybe a periscope for your commute. The very last vestiges of human habitation are gone. The city is no longer visible. It has been completely consigned to the watery oblivion that had been its destiny for so long. For centuries, it will remain there, silent and unseen, a ghost city beneath the waves. The mud and silt of the delta, which had once been the source of life, now become its blanket, preserving it in a thick, dark embrace, like a time capsule sealed away from the world. This muddy embrace, a quirky tidbit, is precisely what would later allow the city's incredible preservation, unlike many other ancient sites exposed to air and erosion. The very thing that drowned it also became its protector. The silence that descends is profound. No more human voices, no more clatter of daily life, no more sacred hymns from the temples. Just the water everywhere. Thonis-Heracleion is no longer a place on a map, but a memory, a legend, a whispered tale among sailors who might have seen strange currents or felt unexplained eddies in that particular stretch of the bay. It becomes a phantom city, existing only in the fading recollections of those who survived its slow demise, and in the deep, dark, cold embrace of the sea. It's the ultimate out of sight, out of mind scenario, but for an entire city. Talk about a buyer's market for waterfront property, though I hear the resale value wasn't great. The sea, for all its power, is also a master of discretion, holding its secrets close for centuries to come. You drift now, not through the physical world of ancient Thonis-Heracleion, but through the swirling mist of time itself, carried on currents of forgotten whispers and fading memories. The city, as you last saw it, was sinking, slowly, inevitably, into the embrace of the sea. But what happens to a city's memory when its physical form vanishes? That's where the real magic, or perhaps the real tragedy, begins. Imagine, for a moment, the last few families to leave. They trudge inland, their hearts heavy, their eyes still burning with the image of their temples, their homes, their very livelihoods being swallowed by the relentless blue. They carry with them not just their meager possessions, but the vivid, raw memory of a grand port, a bustling hub, a place where gods were honored and fortunes were made. They tell their children, and their children's children, tales of the great city by the sea, the one that used to be there. They speak of the colossal statues, the vibrant markets, the ships that sailed in from lands far away, laden with exotic goods. Remember Thonis-Heracleion? They might say, their voices thick with nostalgia. It was a jewel, truly. But here's the thing about memory, isn't it? It's a bit like an ancient papyrus scroll left out in the sun. The edges fray, the ink fades, and eventually, if you're not careful, it just crumbles into dust. The first generation remembers the feel of the city, the smell of the spices in the market, the sound of the shipwrights' hammers. They can still point to the horizon and say, "It's under there, you know." The second generation remembers their parents' stories, perhaps with a little less detail, a little more embellishment. The market gets bigger, the statues taller, the sinking more dramatic. It's like a game of ancient telephone, where the message gets wonderfully, wildly distorted with each retelling. You can almost hear a bored teenager from the third generation sighing, "Oh, another story about the sunken city, Grandmummy? Can't we just talk about the price of lentils?" Because even legendary tales have to compete with the mundane realities of daily life, you see. As the centuries roll by, the direct witnesses are long gone. The great-great-grandchildren of those who fled might know of a city of wonders that disappeared, but the precise location becomes vague. Was it this bay? Or that one? The name itself, Thonis-Heracleion, a dual identity that always caused a bit of confusion even when it was above water. Thonis for the Egyptians, Heracleion for the Greeks, becomes even more muddled. Some stories might refer to it as just the sunken city. Others might merge its identity with other coastal towns, or even with purely mythical places. It's a bit like trying to remember where you left your car keys 1,000 years ago. Good luck with that. This is where the mainstream historical fact about ancient knowledge transfer really comes into play. In an age before widespread printing presses and universal literacy, the preservation of history relied heavily on two things: oral tradition and the meticulous, often laborious, work of scribes. For Thonis-Heracleion, the oral tradition, as we've seen, became a game of whispers and embellishments. The written records, however, were the truly fragile things. Papyrus is delicate, susceptible to rot, fire, and the sheer indifference of time. Many official records, port ledgers, temple inventories, even personal letters that might have mentioned the city in its prime, simply decayed or were lost to the sands of time. There wasn't exactly a cloud-based backup system in ancient Egypt, nor a dedicated team of digital archivists. Can you imagine the bureaucratic nightmare? Excuse me, sir, do you have that scroll from 500 BC detailing the exact coordinates of the lost port? No? Oh, well, never mind then. And so, Thonis-Heracleion began its slow, inevitable transition from a tangible place on the map to a shimmering, elusive legend. It wasn't just forgotten, it was transformed. The factual details, the specific architecture, the political alliances, the daily routines, peeled away like old paint. What remained were the grand narratives: a city blessed by the gods, a place of immense wealth, a port that vanished without a trace. These fragments were then rewoven into the tapestry of existing myths. Perhaps it became the setting for a story about a god's wrath, or a king's hubris, or a love lost to the waves. It merged with other fantastical tales of underwater realms and forgotten civilizations. This is where you start to see the quirky or fringe tidbit emerge. For instance, the very name, Heracleion, referring to the Greek hero Heracles, lent itself perfectly to myth-making. Heracles himself was often associated with impossible feats and divine encounters. So, a city named after him, submerged beneath the waves? It practically begged for a heroic narrative or a cautionary tale. Some ancient writers, like Diodorus Siculus, mentioned Heracleion, but often in the context of legendary events, like Heracles' visit to Egypt. They weren't writing guidebooks, you see, they were chronicling the grand sweep of history and myth, often blurring the lines between the two. The sinking of a city, even a real one, was ripe for being folded into the broader mythological framework of the age. It's like how every modern blockbuster needs an origin story, even if it's completely made up. Historians still argue whether the memory of Thonis-Heracleion truly vanished from all learned discourse, or if it simply became so intertwined with legend that its real-world identity was obscured. Some scholars propose that while the common memory faded, a few obscure texts, perhaps tucked away in forgotten temple libraries or private collections, might have retained more accurate details, though these details were never widely disseminated. It's a fascinating debate, isn't it? Was it a complete wipe, or just a very, very thorough dusting under the historical rug? The city became a ghost on the map, a whisper on the wind. Mariners would sail over the very spot where its grand temples once stood, completely unaware of the majesty hidden beneath their keels. Fishermen might snag their nets on a submerged column or a broken amphora, dismissing it as just another anomaly of the deep. The precise location, once a beacon for ships from across the Mediterranean, became just another stretch of open water. The very concept of Thonis-Heracleion, the vibrant, living city, receded into the realm of folklore, a tale told to wide-eyed children around a flickering fire, a story to illustrate the impermanence of even the grandest human endeavors. You can almost hear the storyteller's voice, low and resonant, as they speak of the city that once stood where the waves now crash. And the gods, they might intone. They grew weary of its splendor, or perhaps of its people's pride, and so they took it back, bit by bit, into the watery depths. This dramatic framing, this attribution to divine will or cosmic fate, served to explain the inexplicable, to give meaning to a loss that was otherwise just a slow, geological inevitability. It's much more poetic than tectonic subsidence and deltaic erosion. Wouldn't you agree? And certainly more satisfying for a bedtime story. So, for nearly 2 millennia, Thonis-Heracleion existed only as an echo, a faint reverberation in the collective human memory. It was a phantom city, a forgotten dream, its name occasionally surfacing in an ancient text, but always shrouded in a veil of ambiguity and myth. It became a testament to the power of time to erase, to transform, and to bury not just physical structures, but the very knowledge of their existence. It was a city that, for all intents and purposes, simply wasn't there anymore, not in any way that truly mattered to the living world above the waves. Its story, once a vibrant tapestry of daily life, had unraveled into a few loose threads of legend, waiting patiently for someone, anyone, to pick them up again. You've been drifting for centuries now, lost in the murky depths of legend, a city whispered about but never truly seen. Thonis-Heracleion, a name that had evaporated from maps and minds, existed only as a hazy memory, a phantom port in the annals of ancient texts. For over 1,000 years, the only visitors to your once bustling streets were the silent, shimmering schools of fish, darting through the ghostly remains of what was once a vibrant metropolis. Imagine the quiet, the absolute stillness, broken only by the gentle sway of the currents and the occasional, rather rude, bubble from a passing grouper. It's a bit like misplacing your car keys, only on a truly epic, civilization-sized scale. You know they exist somewhere, but finding them? That's a whole different story. But then, as the 20th century drew to a close, a new kind of explorer emerged, one not seeking gold or glory in the traditional sense, but knowledge, history, and the thrill of uncovering the past. You find yourself, or rather, the silent, submerged remains of you, becoming the focus of a truly remarkable quest. Imagine, if you will, a group of dedicated individuals, led by the indefatigable French underwater archaeologist Franck Goddio, staring at old maps, poring over ancient texts, and listening to the faint echoes of historical whispers. They weren't just looking for a city, they were searching for a legend, a place so thoroughly erased by the sea that many scholars had begun to doubt its very existence. It was a bit like trying to find Atlantis, but with more scientific instruments and slightly less dramatic music. You can almost feel the hum of the research vessel, the gentle thrumming of the engines on the surface, a stark contrast to the profound silence you've known for so long. Beneath the waves, the true work begins. Picture the advanced technology descending into the blue-green murk, sophisticated magnetometers sweeping across the seabed, detecting anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field, tiny, almost imperceptible shifts that hint at buried structures, ancient artifacts, or perhaps just a very old, very lost anchor. Sonar pulses pierce the water, painting ghostly images of the seafloor, searching for anything that doesn't quite fit the natural contours. It's a painstaking process, like trying to find a needle in a haystack, if the haystack was a murky, vast underwater expanse and the needle was a city. A really big needle, admittedly, but still. Then, the first hints. Not a grand temple, not a colossal statue, but perhaps a scatter of pottery shards, an unusual pattern on the seafloor, a slight rise that isn't quite natural. These are the breadcrumbs, the tantalizing whispers from your watery grave. The archaeologists, with their specialized equipment and their boundless patience, begin to narrow down the search area, their hearts beating a little faster with each promising signal. You can almost sense their excitement, their quiet anticipation. It's a slow dance of technology and intuition, guided by decades of experience. Finally, the moment arrives. You feel the gentle disturbance of the water as divers, clad in their streamlined suits, descend into your silent embrace. The powerful lights on their helmets cut through the gloom, illuminating the silt-laden water. And then, through the shifting particles, something solid, something unnatural, begins to resolve itself. It might be the curve of a weathered stone block, a fragment of a column, or perhaps the edge of a wall. The first confirmed discovery of Thonis-Heracleion by Franck Goddio and his team occurred in the year 2000, a landmark moment in underwater archaeology that definitively pulled you from the realm of myth into tangible reality. This was not a lucky fluke, it was the culmination of years of dedicated research and relentless searching. As the divers meticulously clear away centuries of accumulated sediment, layer by painstaking layer, the true scale of the rediscovery begins to emerge. You see their astonished expressions, even through their masks, as the silt parts to reveal incredible sights. Imagine the thrill when a colossal statue, perhaps of a pharaoh or a goddess, slowly emerges from its muddy tomb, its features remarkably preserved despite its long slumber. Or the gasp of awe as an entire, perfectly preserved stele, a massive stone slab bearing an ancient decree, still legible after millennia, is unveiled. These aren't just objects, they are direct messages from the past, speaking volumes about the life you once held. The challenges are immense, of course. The water itself is a constant adversary, limiting visibility, exerting pressure, and making every movement a deliberate, slow effort. Delicate artifacts must be handled with extreme care, often needing to be encased in special frames or lifted by balloons to prevent further damage. It's a bit like performing surgery in a swimming pool, blindfolded, with only your feet to guide you. Okay, maybe not that bad, but you get the idea. The process of documenting each find, mapping its exact location, and carefully bringing it to the surface is a testament to the dedication of these modern explorers. What do they find? Oh, you reveal so much! They uncover the remains of grand temples dedicated to Ammonius and Khonsu, their massive stone blocks still bearing the marks of ancient craftsmen. They find countless religious offerings, from tiny amulets to substantial bronze figures. They discover the very docks you once boasted, still lined with the remains of ships that sank alongside you, some still laden with their cargo of grain, spices, and precious metals. It's a treasure trove not of gold, but of information. They even find an astonishing number of gold coins, which, while not the primary goal, certainly adds a certain sparkle to the proceedings. One particularly quirky tidbit is the discovery of numerous lead boxes, once thought to contain grave goods, but later revealed to hold the remains of ritualistic offerings, often in the form of small, mummified animals. It offers a fascinating glimpse into the less understood aspects of ancient Egyptian religious practices. The most profound discovery, perhaps, is the undeniable proof that Thonis and Heracleion were, in fact, the same city, just known by different names to different cultures, Thonis to the Egyptians, Heracleion to the Greeks. This had been a point of scholarly debate for centuries, with historians still arguing whether the duality of names reflected distinct districts, or simply the differing perspectives of two dominant cultures interacting within the same bustling port. But the artifacts, inscribed with both names, found within the same archaeological layers, provide compelling evidence that puts the debate to rest, at least for now. It's like finding out your favorite superhero has been living a double life, but both identities are equally awesome. The archaeologists meticulously catalog every coin, every piece of jewelry, every ceramic shard. They piece together fragmented statues, reassemble fallen columns, and carefully lift the massive stone blocks that once formed your sacred sanctuaries. You see them creating detailed 3D maps of your submerged layout, painstakingly recreating your former glory from the scattered remnants. It's not just about pulling things out of the water, it's about understanding the story they tell, the lives they represent, and the civilization that created them. The process of conservation is equally challenging. Once brought to the surface, the artifacts, having been protected by the anoxic conditions of the seabed for so long, are immediately vulnerable to degradation from oxygen and light. They are moved to specialized conservation labs, where they undergo careful desalination and preservation treatments, often for years, before they can be displayed. It's a slow, meticulous rebirth, ensuring that your long-lost secrets can finally be shared with the world. And so, piece by painstaking piece, you, the lost city of Thonis-Heracleion, emerge from the watery oblivion. You are no longer a myth, no longer a legend, but a tangible, incredible archaeological site, revealing the secrets of a once mighty Egyptian port city that succumbed to the relentless forces of nature. Your silent tomb beneath the waves has become a vibrant classroom, teaching us about the ebb and flow of civilizations, the power of the natural world, and the enduring human spirit that seeks to understand its own past. You drift now, not through the ancient avenues or the watery depths, but through the quiet chambers of your own mind, as the story of Thonis-Heracleion settles like silt on the riverbed of your thoughts. What, you might wonder, does the slow, watery demise of an ancient Egyptian port, millennia ago, truly teach us? It's not just a sad tale of a city that took an unexpected swim, it's a profound meditation on resilience, environmental change, and the enduring, yet fragile, nature of human civilization itself. First, let's untangle the threads of resilience. Imagine, if you will, the generations of people who called Thonis-Heracleion home. They weren't suddenly wiped out in a single, dramatic cataclysm, like Pompeii with its fiery embrace. No, their struggle was a slow, creeping surrender, a gradual concession to the inevitable. You see them, perhaps, raising their doorsteps a little higher each decade, building new foundations on slightly elevated ground, trying to outweed the subtle encroachment of the sea. It's like trying to bail out a bathtub with a leaky faucet that's getting progressively worse, only the bathtub is your entire city, and the faucet is, well, nature itself. Eventually you just pack your bags and go, don't you? This slow abandonment, this incremental retreat, speaks volumes about human adaptability. When the ground literally started to give way, when the freshwater wells began to taste suspiciously salty, the people didn't just throw up their hands in despair and wait for the final plunge. They moved. They relocated their lives, their livelihoods, their sacred rites. The very fact that Alexandria, the new jewel of the Ptolemaic dynasty, rose to such prominence just a few miles away, drawing away Thonis-Heracleion's trade and population, isn't just a political maneuver, it's an act of collective resilience. The Egyptians, a people renowned for their enduring civilization, didn't just crumble when one city sank. They shifted, they adapted, they rebuilt elsewhere. This mainstream historical fact, the strategic and economic shift from Thonis-Heracleion to Alexandria as the primary port and capital of Ptolemaic Egypt, highlights not just a city's decline, but a civilization's dynamic response to changing circumstances, both environmental and political. It's a testament to the human spirit's remarkable capacity to reroot itself, even when its foundations are literally washed away. You can almost hear them muttering, "Well, that spot didn't work out. Let's try over here, shall we? Maybe somewhere with better drainage this time." Now, let's pivot to the environmental lessons, which, frankly, feel uncomfortably relevant in our own modern world. Thonis-Heracleion's fate is a stark, watery warning from the past. You watch, in your mind's eye, as the land slowly, imperceptibly sinks. This wasn't just about sea levels rising, it was also about geological subsidence, the very ground compacting and settling beneath the enormous weight of the Nile's deposited silt, and perhaps, the city's own structures. It's a reminder that not all environmental threats announce themselves with a dramatic flourish. Some are quiet, relentless, like a slow-motion geological yawn. The Nile Delta, where Thonis-Heracleion was perched, is a notoriously dynamic environment. Rivers change course, sediment builds up in some places and erodes in others, and the constant push and pull of the sea shapes and reshapes the coastline. It's a bit like trying to build a sandcastle on a very active beach, only the tide comes in over centuries. The earthquakes and tsunamis, those sudden, violent shoves, merely accelerated a process that was already well underway. They were the final, rude awakening for a city already nodding off into the abyss. Historians still argue whether the primary cause of the city's final abandonment was purely the relentless environmental forces, or if the economic and political ascendancy of Alexandria simply made resistance futile and relocation the more practical, less painful choice. But either way, the environmental pressure was undeniably immense. This ancient story teaches you that coastal cities, particularly those on river deltas, are inherently vulnerable. You might joke that ancient city planners really needed a Zillow equivalent that could predict centuries of geological shifts and sea level rise, but the truth is, they built where the river met the sea because that's where the trade was. It was a calculated risk, one that eventually came due. It makes you wonder about our own coastal megacities today, doesn't it? Are we paying enough attention to the subtle whispers of the land beneath our feet? Or are we just hoping our concrete and steel are stronger than the planet's slow, inexorable forces? Finally, we arrive at the profound insights into human civilization itself. Thonis-Heracleion's watery tomb serves as an astonishing time capsule, preserving a moment of vibrant life, frozen in mud and silence. The sheer scale of what was lost, and then found, is mind-boggling. You find gold coins, colossal statues of pharaohs and gods, intact pottery, even the wooden remains of ships, a complete snapshot of an ancient world. It's a quirky tidbit that among the most significant finds were perfectly preserved cultic artifacts, including tiny lead boat models used in religious ceremonies, suggesting the city's deep spiritual connection to its watery environment, even as that environment became its undoing. This preservation, ironically, is a gift of its demise. Had Thonis-Heracleion simply faded away on dry land, its stones likely would have been plundered for new construction, its artifacts scattered or destroyed. Instead, the sea became its silent, protective guardian, holding its secrets for over a millennium until modern archaeology, with its sonar and submersibles, could respectfully unveil them. This story humbles you, reminding you of the impermanence of even the grandest human endeavors. We build our towering cities, our magnificent ports, our intricate networks of trade and culture, believing them to be eternal. Yet, in the long sweep of geological time, they are but transient marks on the Earth's surface, vulnerable to forces far greater than our ingenuity. Thonis-Heracleion reminds us that human civilization is not a static monolith, but a dynamic, ever-shifting narrative, constantly interacting with and responding to the natural world. It also highlights the incredible human drive to connect, to trade, to worship, to build, even in places that, in hindsight, might seem precarious. It's a testament to our ambition, our resilience, and our sometimes naive belief in our own mastery over nature. The city's fate is a gentle yet firm whisper: we are part of nature, not separate from it. Our greatest achievements can be reclaimed by the very elements we depend upon. So, as you drift off, you carry with you not just the image of a sunken city, but a deeper understanding of the delicate dance between human ambition and the planet's enduring power. The story of Thonis-Heracleion, then, isn't really a sad ending at all, is it? It's more like a long, slow exhale, a gentle sigh from the past that whispers into our present. You can almost feel the soft, cool currents of the Mediterranean caressing the ancient stones, polishing them smooth with the passage of time. The sun, a sleepy orb peeking through the mists of your imagination, casts long, gentle shadows across the submerged temples, illuminating secrets held for so long in the quiet embrace of the deep. There's a comforting rhythm to the ocean, a soft, undulating hum that reminds you of the Earth's ancient heart, beating slowly, steadily, through eons. You imagine the fish, tiny, iridescent flecks of life, darting through the grand halls where pharaohs once walked, their scales catching the filtered light like scattered jewels. The story of Thonis-Heracleion is a lullaby of impermanence, a gentle reminder that all things, even the grandest human endeavors, eventually return to the earth, or in this case, the sea, from which they came. But in that return, in that quiet submersion, there's a new kind of peace, a timeless stillness that invites you to simply be, to let go of the day's worries, and to drift into the soft, comforting currents of sleep. The ancient city sleeps now, and so, too, can you.